All right, let's dive into one of history's most compelling and just plain weirdest mysteries. It's a story packed with secret science, absolutely terrifying consequences, and a government that swears up and down none of it ever happened. We're talking about the Philadelphia experiment. So, picture this. The year is 1943. The whole world is deep in the chaos of World War II. This is a time of incredible invention, huge technological leaps, but it's all happening behind a thick curtain of wartime secrecy. And right at the heart of this whole tale, the U.S. Navy, one of the most powerful forces on the planet, and they are desperately searching for any advantage, any new tech that could give them an edge to help win the war. And according to this legend, they found it. They found that edge. And they did something that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. They took an entire warship and just made it vanish into thin air. Okay, so right off the bat, we've got two completely opposite stories. On one side, you have these wild claims of teleportation and invisibility. And on the other, you have the US Navy with a firm, flat-out denial. This is the core conflict that's made the Philadelphia experiment a mystery that's fascinated people for decades. So what is this story that people have been whispering about for more than 70 years? Let's unpack the incredible legend of the destroyer escort ship, the USS Eldridge. Now, the story insists this wasn't some kind of magic trick. Nope. This was supposed to be top secret, next-level physics. The goal, supposedly, was to fire up a massive electromagnetic field, something so powerful it could literally bend light and radio waves around the ship. Basically a real-life invisibility cloak. And you gotta ask, why? Well, this wasn't just for kicks. It had a very real, very urgent purpose. The Battle of the Atlantic was absolutely brutal, and German U-boats were a deadly, deadly threat. So imagine having a warship that's invisible to radar, or even better, invisible to the naked eye. That would be an absolute game changer. And it's that little bit of military logic that really helped this story take hold. The way the so-called witnesses described the scene, man, it's pure Hollywood. They talk about this strange, glowing, greenish fog that just rolled over the ship, the sound of crackling electricity in the air. And then, poof, the entire steel warship was just gone. But the story doesn't just stop there with a cool vanishing act. In fact, the most unforgettable and, honestly, the most disturbing part of the legend is what they say happened to the sailors who were on board. So the ship supposedly vanishes from Philadelphia, blinks into existence for a moment hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, and then zaps back. But when it finally reappeared for good, something was terribly, terribly wrong. The big question is, what was the human cost of a trip like that? Okay, this is where it gets really dark. The stories are just pure nightmare fuel. We're talking about men literally fused into the steel of the ship, like part of the metal itself. Others were said to have gone completely insane from the experience. Some were just never seen again. And maybe the weirdest claim of all, that some of the survivors would just uncontrollably teleport for the rest of their lives. Can you even imagine? It's an incredible, absolutely terrifying story. But, and this is a big but, is any of it actually true? It's time to put on our detective hats, separate the facts from the fiction, and see what's really going on here. And this is where the whole incredible story just slams into a brick wall of reality. You've got this spectacular tale on one side, but on the other, investigators and historians have found nothing. A complete and total lack of proof. No declassified documents, no ship's logs that match the story, no physical evidence, not a shred. So, if there's no evidence at all, then where in the world did a story this wild and this detailed even come from? Well, to find the answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Believe it or not, this entire sprawling myth can be traced back to just one guy. In the 1950s, a man who called himself Carlos Allende started sending these really bizarre letters to a UFO researcher. He claimed he'd seen the whole thing happen from another ship. But when people looked into it, it turned out he had a history of mental health issues, and his story was full of holes. And yet, the story he told was just too good, too compelling to die. And then there's just the basic science of it all. In 1943, the technology to teleport a massive warship or bend light around it, well, it was pure science fiction. But, and this is the interesting part, there is a tiny grain of truth buried in here. The Navy really was doing secret experiments with electromagnetism. They were working on something called degaussing, which involved wrapping a ship in cables to make it magnetically invisible to German mines and torpedoes. So you can kind of see how a real secret project to make a ship invisible could get twisted and exaggerated over the years into, well, this.
So it seems like the story is basically a tall tale from one unreliable person, probably sparked by some real, but way less dramatic, science. But that leads to an even bigger question. Why? Why are we still so fascinated by this story decades later? Why is it stuck around?
Well, when you look at it, it's pretty much the perfect recipe for a myth that just won't die. You've got the mystery of wartime secrecy, where anything feels possible. It taps into our fears about powerful new technologies we don't understand, like the atomic bomb. And maybe most importantly, we humans just love a good story. It was pretty much destined to become a pop culture legend. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. The Philadelphia experiment might not be factually true, but the fact that it survived for so long tells us something really interesting about ourselves. It leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. What is it that makes a really good story feel more powerful, more compelling, and sometimes even more real than the plain and simple truth?